without losing sight of the principles that make open societies possible. So thank you for being here, and welcome.
Of this panel, which has two presentations of around 15 minutes. Muriel instructed the chairs to keep the introduction really very brief, so I will now briefly introduce the first presenter, Milan Hanyš from Charles University in Prague, who is anthropologist and philosopher, and his research and teaching interests are primarily intellectual history and political philosophy. And the title of his presentation is Nationalism and Pandemic Governance in Early COVID Era Czech Republic. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks. I'm very grateful to Muriel for organizing this event. It's the first time I'm speaking publicly in this type of an academic field about COVID, and actually Muriel was the person who persuaded me to take COVID seriously as a topic of academic research, which I was very hesitant to do, since for me it was a traumatic experience, something to forget. But now, in retrospective, I'm grateful, since it was very amusing to prepare for this presentation for this event. So I hope you will enjoy it as well. And let's start with a piece of music, just a few seconds, so that you have the impression, which brings us back to the early weeks of the so-called pandemic. Okay, akzeptieren, and a short advertisement, and then we will. Oh, it's not shared. Okay, it seems the technical equipment.
I can try to help you out.
Okay, will be helpful. There will be another video then, so could share it for a moment. Yeah, so now. Great. So could you share the screen as well? Wonderful. So let's set up the countdown timer. Mm-hmm. Enough for the impression of the empty concert hall. It's of course something we all have experienced all around the world. But here the piece which is chosen has a special significance for in a Czech national imaginary, since it's a piece composed by Bedřich Smetana, a 19th century romantic composer, who is perceived as someone who fulfilled the process of national emancipation, since he proved finally that the Czechs possess the same artistic qualities as Germans. He created operas which were compared to that of Richard Wagner. And so it was after decades of the process of emancipation, finally a composer who proved the worth of the nation. And the piece is called Má vlast, my country, my fatherland. But in Czech, a national imaginary country is something else than just a piece of land. It's a mother. It's a biological mother which connects all its citizens through biological links. So that piece was deliberately chosen to unite the nation in the early weeks of pandemic, and an empty hall, as it were, symbolizes the unity of nations. There is no one, that means that everyone is invited. It was broadcasted all around the country, and the same piece was played in the 1990s, so after the Velvet Revolution, in June, when the first free elections were held after the fall of communism. And it was an event which attended Václav Havel and was conducted by famous composer Raphael Kubelik, who was exiled during communism and then came back. And it was perceived in the 90s as kind of reconciliation of a nation with the state. Since the communist state in Czech imaginary is seen usually, as Marián very well knows, as communism was imposed from outside. Even though Czechs elected communist leaders in the 1948, in the Czech national memory, it is perceived as something external, as something foreign to national identity. So the motto of the Velvet Revolution was, "We are not like them." And them were the communist leaders, were the police, were the agents of the secret police. So that they do not belong to the nation. And so that fact that the piece was played in the 1990s and then again in the 2020, so exactly after 30 years, reveals something about the national perception of the pandemic in the time. And even the harpist, Jana Bošková, she said explicitly that Má vlast, my country, my homeland, that is the Czech land itself. It is a concept. It expresses the purity of the Czech land, the purity of Czech music. It is a symbol recognized around the world. And then she continued, the moments we are living through can be compared to a revolution. Back then, people came together, they could take to the streets and show their strength as a mass. Here we cannot be together. But the awareness that we are all in the same boat is absolutely identical. So the pandemic in the early months in the Czech Republic was perceived not just as a mere health crisis, but it was an opportunity to prove the worth of the nation once again and to unite. To unite in the war against the virus. So it required the biopolitical mobilization, and we see already from this map, from the 13th of March, that the Czech Republic and Slovakia enforced the strictest measures after Italy and Balkan countries, even though there were no cases, or almost no cases. No health person died in the time. And so my question was, why Czechs complied with lockdowns so easily in spring 2020? Not because state forced them to comply, but basically we're the common, ordinary Czech citizens who forced state to declare measures and declare lockdowns. And I will show why or how the national self-stereotypes were weaponized for biopolitical mobilization. And I will speak about Czechs only, because Slovaks in Czech national consciousness are not present at all. They do not possess autonomy. So even though the measures were similar and the politics was identical in relation to COVID, it was not present at all in the Czech public discourse, as usual. And the very helpful framework to me was a book by anthropologist Ladislav Holý, who wrote the book The Little Czech Man and the Great Czech Nation. And it explained a lot, I mean the title already, since the Little Czech Man, an ordinary Czech citizen, is someone who basically maintained the identity of Czechness, of Czech nation, even without state, despite the state, even in times of the Habsburg rule. So it is perceived as someone who was a true carrier of national identity, usually again, or very often against the state. Another feature which is important is that is a theatrical aspect of Czech national culture, that people, intellectuals, journalists are obsessed with the idea of being perceived, seen by the world. So whatever they do not do just for the sake of, fighting for liberty in the Velvet Revolution, but also to show the world what the true nature we possess, what true qualities we possess. And it started already in the 19th century when historian František Polacký wrote that the Slavs possess the democratic identity in comparison to Germans, who were more aristocratic. So the Czechs are uniquely equipped because they are on the edge of the Germanic world and the Slavic world. So, so they are peaceful, they are more democratic, and this kind of humanist identity and democratic identity of the Czech culture needs to be seen and recognized not by ourselves but by others, by the world. And the same or similar framing reoccurred during the pandemic, at least in the spring. And the whole Europe is watching us. The whole world is watching. This is a perpetual topic in Czech media. And so this theatrical structure records in the 1848 revolution, when the national theater was established. It was the whole world was watching how ordinary Czechs were willing to give their own money for the common project, for the cultural task they had to create this building. In 1968, it was not just a mere struggle for more freedoms, it was also again a theater, place where the historical events of the worldwide significance were made. And global revolution and COVID-19 possessed a similar structure. The world is watching on us. So here are the few tropes which I identified, which are typical of the Czech national consciousness, Czech cultural semantics, which were actualized during pandemic. So the idea that Czech possess golden Czech hands, whatever Czech touches turns into gold. We are not great in terms of numbers, but still there are great achievements possible when people, provide their abilities to a common project. So that smallness is not an advantage, but in terms of power, but in terms of moral superiority it is. State is usually an enemy. State is a foreign imposition. It was a Habsburg state, it was a communist state, now it's a corrupted state. Usually it is a nation which provides this authentic moral community, and one needs to, subjugate to this requirement of the national unity rather than to the state. World is watching. Important thing, which was also actualized during pandemic, was East and West dynamics. I will speak about later how it was used again to weaponize, to mobilize the compliance. And there is a strong idea that Czech nation is really possess unique cultural advantages. That even though the political institutions might not be so developed, it is a nation of culture, nation of intelligence. Which state had a first president who was a professor? Yeah, Czechoslovakia. Yeah, and then Havel, yeah, the famous playwright, again a president. It proves something. It proves that, yeah, we are so educated. We have these unique abilities to realize what is valuable and what is not in terms of culture. And it also involved technical abilities. Yeah, that Czechs are great inventors. So there was a campaign of the Czech is nano, and the nanotechnologies will create masks which will protect the virus much better than other equipment, and that could be the way out of the pandemic. An idea of an application, tracking application, smart quarantine, which could also reduce the cases of the coronavirus to zero. So these are tropes which were actualized in different contexts. So in the early March, there was a spontaneous movement among ordinary citizens, ordinary people, who sew masks themselves, textile masks, which proved to be useless later. But and there was a lot of evidence that they are useless at all. That in that time even that they actually can make things worse because, well, the hygienic, it's very hard to make them sterile, and well, you're breathing from your own, it doesn't make sense.
And people didn't change them every day either.
Yeah. so it could make the health situation worse, but it didn't matter. It was a case where the nation could prove its true character, that we possess golden Czech hands. In a few days, the Facebook group Česko-Širošky Czech Sew Masks had more than 40,000 members. There was a map where you could see. I have only 2 minutes left. Oh no.
So he can speak a little bit more because there are only two instead of three.
Already.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're at the beginning. Okay, so Max, here you see a Czech Liberal Weekly where the slogan "Nation unto itself" was used, a slogan from the 19th century, which proved that the sewing machines were the vehicles of national unification. This is a national museum building where it's written, "Together we will manage." Together we will manage. It was also deliberately chosen because it is a place of special significance. Wenceslas Square, the place where all the political manifestations of Czechs happened from the 19th century onwards. So masks were not just a vehicle of containment, but vehicle of national consciousness and identity. There was a video created in English. I would love to show you a few seconds, but I'm not allowed. So you can watch it later.
No, okay, show us a few seconds.
It is wonderful.
We have an important message for all of you.
An important message for all of you. Deliberately made in English so that the world will see how we get through, how we Czechs found a unique way out of the pandemic.
Especially if you live in a country that is right now facing the new coronavirus. The pandemic is growing exponentially in many countries. But the Czech Republic is one of the few in Europe that has significantly slowed down the spread of the virus. In this video, we would like to tell you what we did differently, and mainly, we would like to help you to do the same. We are following social distancing and the rules stay at home. Others do that too. We also have strict hygienic procedures. Others do that as well. But the main difference is everyone who has to leave their house has to wear a face mask. Everyone.
I know, they maybe told you that masks wouldn't protect you, but there are studies proving that
It's a really funny video. It has millions of views. It was broadcasted by CNN, by many other media outlets all around the world. And actually, it was Peter Ludwig, an activist, who created this video, and who basically forced WHO to change the policy. And what is striking on this video is this kind of messianism, which is there obvious. We have found a way. We're so clever. We know much better than all the experts who had the pandemic plans, which did not count as masks at all. That masks were considered to be useless in the containment of the virus. So this was again this view that we are the chosen one, but also that the world is watching. That's the fact noticed by world media that Czech is inspiring other countries. This is important. It was always, or very often present there. It's not just our politics, but how our politics is perceived by others is a constitutive element of national consciousness. Here you see, of course, Andrej Babiš, a populist politician who tried to lecture
Donald Trump.
It was not a clever thing to do, to lecture Trump. And a part of the biological mobilization was that we were ordinary citizens. And the fun part is that the lockdowns started not because some group of experts decided to do it, but because one unknown person, a director of insurance company, created a simple Excel very simply prolonged the cases and to show that, well, if we won't do anything, in a few weeks we will be in the same situation like in Bergamo in northern Italy. So he brought it to Babiš, to Adam Vojtěch, the Minister of Health at the time, and he basically was the one who was unknown to the public without any responsibility, but who was the main person who was consulting everything. And actually, he then created a grassroots group of activists, mainly IT entrepreneurs, people from delivery services. That proves the point that there were people from companies like Alza and others, which provide goods per internet, which formed the policy, influenced the policy, and the established public health experts were sidelined. So it was again a proof that the ordinary Czech people, the state is bad in handling these complex issues, but when ordinary Czech people unite, it's great. Okay, the last thing I will mention here, the last two things, is it's a reflection of one journalist in a serious journal, like Handelsblad, Hospodářské noviny, the economic journal, and he wrote, okay, why are we so good? How it happened? And the idea was that our heritage, our cultural heritage, our communist past is protecting us against the virus because we are willing to accept authoritarian measures. We have there was enforced vaccination during the communist era against tuberculosis, which might help, etc., etc. The same true that so that means that we are not as West. We are more Eastern, and it was supposed to be an advantage. But later, in October and September of the same year, the similar characteristics turned to be false. If coronavirus is from anything, it is that Schweig, the literary figure from Jaroslav Hašek, is alive. Right, German media. It was just Tagesblatt, not German media. But what is important is this right German media German media is watching us, how we now failed, and that this ordinary citizen, who was an inventor on spring, is now a problematic person who does not comply to measures at all in the autumn. So yeah, there are some funny things as well, but I'm absolutely out of time, so I'm sorry.
You are.
And that's it from my side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you, Milan.
I would like to apologize in advance for my elementary school level of PowerPoint. I'm not very proficient and I was a little bit behind. In my presentation, I will be discussing the public role of epidemiologists in both Czech Republic and Slovakia during the COVID period. More specifically, I will be focusing on two public epidemiologists, Roman Primula in Czechia and Vladimír Krčméry in Slovakia. I chose these two in particular because they were the most visible, they had the most media presence. They became very quickly, within weeks, basic household names, and they were key players in implementing important COVID pandemic, anti-COVID pandemic measures. This will be a case study. I will basically compare biographies, and especially I will apply media discourse analysis of the both Krčméry and Roman Primula. As a student of communism, I struggle a little bit with the sources because I usually work with archival materials that are 50, 70 years and older. And all of a sudden I have to browse through the internet looking for media articles and interviews, especially interviews with both Krčméry and Roman Primula, which was a little bit difficult for me, but in the end it was a, let's say, interesting endeavor. Before anything else, I have to stress one important underlying similarity of both Krčméry and Primula is the fact they were both vocal adherents of blanket measures throughout the COVID period. That includes mass mandates, border closures, quarantines, lockdowns, and so on. They defended these policies in the spring of 2020 when the spread was low and resulting mortality count was low as well. Also in the autumn and winter months of 2020 and 2021 when the spread was high. This is a little bit of statistics. It's just for the sake of the illustration. Like I always had an issue with the hard data. It is interesting to point that actually Slovakia boasts one of the best track records during the first wave of the pandemic, only 31 deaths. And it's interesting that Czech people usually don't know anything about the Slovakia track records. Milan Hanyš very proficiently mentioned Slovakia people are basically not present in the Czech national consciousness. Moving to the biographies, I'm not gonna go point by point here. I just want to establish that both Vladimír Krčméry in Slovakia and Roman Primula in Czechia, they had basically established scientific academia careers. They were not some sort of outliners in their respective field. In the case of Vladimír Krčméry, I have to point that since the 2000s, early 2000s, he was very active in development projects and various foreign medical missions in the refugee camps in Southeast Europe, and especially in Africa. He became an expert of sorts in tropical diseases, especially malaria and HIV. In this context, I would like to mention, for me, a very controversial Krčméry's HIV stance, where basically said, as you can see here, when he was asked what was the main reason for Africa economic backwardness, According to Krčmery, it was not the experience of imperialism, of colonization, or of dictatorship. It was basically strictly HIV. This is an example of Krčmery's, I would like to describe it as sort of like a tunnel vision of his very categorical binary statements that that are very visible throughout the COVID period. Moving to Roman Primula, Primula's program was a little bit different. It was basically his very prominent conflict of interests. While he was director of Faculty Hospital in Hradec Králové, he famously was doing private advisory gigs for various pharmaceutical companies, including the one owned by his own daughter. And more importantly, he was associated with China Energy Finance Corporation, which heavily invested in Czechia in the middle of the second decade of the 21st century. He had a little bit problems with this, but as you can see, it is a case of falling upwards, because when he was dismissed from the directorship of Faculty Hospital, he became first advisor for the Minister of Health and then Deputy Minister of Health himself. When COVID happened, they basically only enforced their respective positions. They both became members of various task forces for the government in Slovakia and in Czechia, and were important in voicing various recommendations how to deal with the pandemic. Sadly, I was, given my sources, I was not able to establish that everyday mode of operation, how they discussed and reached decisions within the inner circles within the respective task forces. But given the huge media presence of both Krčmery and Primula, I was able to deal with, let's say, the media utterances, basically apply some sort of like media discourse analysis. In their utterances, we can see that they both are reflected, it was reflected in the way they were framing their arguments. While Roman Primula stressed, let's say he was very moderate, he was often obfuscating, he coded his utterances in sort of like a scientific expert language, while Krčmery was way more direct. I think it is a difference between expertise, which is the case of Roman Primula, against experience, which is the case of Krčmery. Krčmery heavily relied on his experience of dealing with pandemics in Africa. He often mentioned that he himself suffered 5 bouts of malaria, 2 of them particularly dangerous, which prepared him for the situation of the COVID pandemic. I could choose various topics like mathematical modeling and case of Sweden, but I choose 2 in particular, which were Chinese pandemic response and the question of mask mandates. We can basically see the difference that while Roman Primula, which was quite interesting because he was the one who colluded with China, he was actually quite cautious in that regard. We can see it in this quote that he said, "I really don't know what the real data in China is." He was very cautious, especially in like April and March. While Vladimir Krčmery, who had, at least to my knowledge, no dealings with China, he basically defended China stoutly. He said, they isolated the epicenter of the epidemic, adopted very strict quarantine measures, and it worked. Another example is very categorical statement. There should be no discussion about it. There is some debate with mask mandates, while both were huge, advocates for wearing respirators in every conditions. Roman Primula, we can see here, he liked to quote his argument. We can see the expressions like expert battle, scientific capacities, and being very, let's say, like moderate about the World Health Organization, like he still respected the institution himself. There was a huge difference in the case of Vladimir Krčmery, who basically dismissed, like, WHO recommendations were changing all the time. He basically used the analogy that wearing or not wearing respirators is like wearing or not wearing parachute when you are jumping from like height of 2,000 meters. Like there is no need, for specialized study. He liked to use the classic, common sense. In this case, healthy present sense. Like we know, it's obvious. Like we don't need specialized studies. That's all. What I found particularly interesting, like going through the interviews, is some sort of like media alignment. Both in the cases of Roman Primula and Vladimír Krčmery, you can see that from like, let's say, right to the center, let's say like moderate right, to the like very left, there was media alignment. They basically were praising in Czech Republic Roman Primula and in Slovakia Vladimír Krčmery. There are some quotes on like various media, like center right, actual alarm very to the left, which we can see like basically, the first was praise. And then there was selective outrage. Famously, Roman Primula was dismissed from the office of Minister of Health when he basically, was not respecting his own anti-COVID measures. He met in a restaurant, had like various political dealings. And in this context, it is important to know that in mainstream media, let's call it like mainstream media for the sake of the purpose, there was not much mention about his like conflict of interest or connection to Chinese interests. They were only talking about his disrespect for anti-COVID policy measures, and because he famously said there is something about the Laplik theory in the October, there was a topic of discussion as well. The case of Vladimír Krčmery is very similar, but I would say like it's even more pronounced. In the year 2020, 2 books were published of his interviews where he's dealt in a very, let's say, like glowy, appreciative terms. I could have chosen some like textual examples, but it's said that sometimes one picture can say more than 1,000 words. So I chose this photo among many else. It's in the first book. Here we can see Vladimír Krčmery on a straw with his cane, wearing protective gloves and respirator, so he wouldn't catch dangerous disease in the middle of the woods. And in this context, it is important to know that both Krčmery and Primula, while they were quite positively praised in the media, their own description of the role of media and by proxy of society was quite negative. I chose 2 quotes. First was made by Roman Primula in a retrospect, actually 5 years later, so quite recently. He said, and I quote, "It is desirable that different opinions are expressed during internal discussions, because otherwise we will not arrive at the right solution. The problem, however, was that many experts and sometimes pseudo-experts presented their opinions in public. This created an image of chaos, because if you receive contradictory information, you don't know how to navigate it." Another quote is from Vladimír Krčmery, concerning the reputation of the academia. He said that part of the blame lies with the media, which has portrayed professors first as corrupt, then as adulterers, and finally as plagiarists. I'm not saying that there are no such cases, but overall it is not an accurate picture. Thanks to it, the academic environment in our country has lost a large part of its authority. I would like to point that while they were discussing the media and by proxy society in a very negative terms, they were never that forthcoming with their, let's say, like their own shortcomings or mistakes committed during the COVID pandemic. Vladimír Krčmery never doubted, never second-guessed any of his categorical statements made during the COVID period. He, in his own mind, was always right. And Roman Primula never openly discussed his quite prominent conflict of interest. Again, in his mind, there was no issue whatsoever. Here we can see the sort of a vision, the rule of experts, who basically, are able to reach within confined circles the proper decisions, and media and society should follow. It is by design very paternalistic vision, which is quoted in scientific and sometimes not even that scientific language. As a historian of communism, I of course cannot help to make comparisons. I know it's popular, we could discuss the role of surveillance, the role of curtailment of personal freedom, the censorship. But pertaining to sciences themselves, scientists like Primula and Krčmery, I think there could be particular historical lesson drawn from the experience of Prague Spring that happened in Czechoslovakia in the year 1968 when they were trying to reform socialism. During that period, the role of the scientists and intellectuals in general was quite prominent. In 1968, they had huge media presence, they had huge media power, they were part of the inner circle, they were members of the important party committees, they had close relationship with party leaders. During 1968, they voiced and basically forwarded various visions quite one-sidedly. And when, of course, in the August of 1968, Soviet tanks came, they, on the behest of party elites, scientists, and intellectuals, compromised with the Soviet power. As a result of all of this, I think there was a loss of confidence among, for the intellectuals, among the ordinary population. And when 10 years later happened, the famous Charta dissident movement, like basically only a few hundreds of intellectuals signed the first document, population at large remained uninterested, as a result of what happened 10 years ago. Of course, I'm being very simplistic here. As a hypothesis, I would like to propose an idea that maybe something quite similar is happening as a result of the performance of the scientists like Primula or Krčméry, during the COVID pandemic. There were some surveys of Czech population by media agency, in the year 2020, 2021, 2023, like how Czech population would evaluate the performance of the government or of the media during the COVID pandemic. I think it's quite important to know the huge drop, the huge decrease in support between 2020 and 2021. And in the case of media, that the decrease is permanent. It didn't go, on the previous levels. Sadly, there are not like respective data for the scientists themselves, but I would like to ask if something very similar didn't happen for the scientists that happened for the media. They basically, by their performance and by their public utterances, they kind of lost the confidence, the support of the ordinary Czech and Slovakian citizen. Thank you for listening.
Comments?
You go.
So we can leave.
Yeah. No?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Both very fascinating. For those of us who, it's really important to have different case studies, I think, to think with and see how things played out. And it seems to me that as a whole, the panel raised the issue of how COVID was really an opportunity for a reassertion of authority of different kinds. Milan, in your presentation, it was around nationalism, and I think that's something which we collectively, those of us who critique the policies, haven't had a chance to really discuss, but the way in which the COVID policies saw this massive reassertion of nationalism, which has continued, it's clearly manifested there. And I suppose a question would be, was that something which was already a trend before the pandemic, or was it something which was a surprise that this would be reasserted in that way? And then, Marián, I think particularly for me, or the last comments you made about people the epidemiologists not acknowledging their conflicts of interest and the paternalism behind that is again part of this reassertion of authority by the class of the expert class. And I suppose a question would be, do you think that this relationship with the media, which these epidemiologists had in some ways also manifested that desire among the expert class to reassert authority in some way?
Any more questions? Okay, then, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. In such a scale, it was new to me, and the participants themselves, and in that time, perceived this really as an opportunity, as a unique opportunity that after 30 years from the Velvet Revolution, now again, it's the possibility to show unity and strength. And so it seems like in ordinary life, ordinary political life, there are no such opportunities, that the people struggle, there are divisions and conflicts and various opinions, and now we are united in opinion, at least in the first months of the pandemic, which was really perceived as something, it's a unique time of history, which should be used now. And the idea of many of the active participants, those who were behind the measures, was, yeah, we should make this as a lesson for the nation, that it should somehow help us to regain pride, to be again proud of our nation, of our abilities, which then turns later into despair in the autumn. So I myself haven't been aware of it before pandemic on such a scale. Of course, there are nationalists as in any country, but that this turns out to be a major topic in mainstream media was new to me. I haven't experienced the Velvet Revolution myself. I was 5 years old in the time, so it was new to me, really.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, to my the question was like if media interests in in scientists created some sort of like authoritarian tendencies in the scientists themselves. I would say like definitely. It definitely created some level of like hubris. Like when you can see like in the beginning, because I was going through the interviews how they happened like during especially the year 2020, and you can see some level of humility in the beginning. Like they were like surprised, like, oh, you're asking me, this is quite interesting, because there was for a huge period, and it's like reflected in the interview. Like in the January, they were like, yeah, something is happening in China. It's very dangerous, but this couldn't happen in Europe. And of course, Chinese are always like meddling the data. But as months followed, especially like April and May, I had like some quotes, like they were more and more confident. They were like, yeah, the work is hard. We are not sleeping at all. And questions like, would you run for a president? Milan Hanyš mentioned like Czech people are very proud. Like we have like professors and dramatists, so maybe they felt like a chance. Like maybe we should have like first, public epidemiologist president. And in a result, like the authoritarian tendencies definitely were there. I was not able, for a shortage of time, like but there definitely are some fascinating quotes when Romala Primula is like acting like he was like even asked like the response of academia by large, wasn't it like a little bit like too slow and maybe there should be like more on point. And basically his answer is like, yeah, we are spending a lot of money for the research. There is like a low level of like autonomy. We don't even know what they were doing. And in my opinion, this needs to stop. This stuff needs to stop. Like academia research should be like more centered and more controlled from top down. So this is like for the case of like academia environment itself, for people like us. But even like in relation to like society, there was this like tendency, like people, it's good people are obeying. That was especially in the like spring months of 2020, and then there was this like level of scolding especially in the autumn of 2020. Like people are not obeying. Like they should like it's for their own good. We are basically trying to save their lives, and they are not listening to our recommendations anymore. So there was like even this like level of like surprise and bewilderment, because they thought like when they became popular in the spring, like this would basically be a be a constant factor.
Okay, we now have quite some questions. I suggest that we collect 3 or 4 first.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have a question to Marián. So you tell us that there is a significant change during the COVID period in the public opinion, and the government lost sympathy. So was there any election during this period of time, and what was the major axis of discourse? Was it to what extent it could be divided between populistic or technocratic, and what was the major issues, and how which party picked the more populist and the more technocratic stance, and how scientists were judged in the political arena as basically old communists who are just talking some outdated things, or Western technocrats who don't understand the Czech conditions. Okay, please, another question.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question to your presentation, Milan. In Germany, in summer 2020, the German government said we are the gold standard of the pandemic management. In my view, in all European countries, or the most European countries, we can observe other kind of populistic nationalism in the public. I think it's typical in such crises since as the pandemic, the classical rally around the flag effect. My question is, do you have any data about the real behavior of the ordinary people in the Czech Republic in the first year of the pandemic? Data about the behavior or data about the perception of the people, the ordinary people? Thank you.
Okay, let's take one more question and then we will make another round, please.
Thank you. I think the question could be to either of you or both of you. I was very, it was in your presentation, Milan, I think, I was very fascinated by this quote of, oh, the awkward truth is that it was our communist past that, you know, prepared us for this. What I know about Germany, and we have a real German, I'm from Switzerland, but my knowledge of the German situation is that there was quite a strong East-West divide, and the resistance to any of the mandates or any of the policies, and the protest movement was much, much stronger in the former communist east of Germany. And I was wondering if you have, whether that position that you described was slightly more of a marginal position, whether this was some sort of edgy journalist saying this awkward thing, or whether there was a general acknowledged truth, and or whether there was any awareness in general that no, we don't want to go back to denunciations, we don't want to go back to neighbors telling on each other, we don't want to go back to any of this. No, you're already shaking your head. Okay, very good.
Sorry.
Okay, Marián has an urgent question.
Yeah, I would like to ask the question now because it connects to what we said before. But you didn't have time to finish, so I would like you to add 1 or 2 more minutes and tell us. You said first the communist past was mobilized as an asset, like people are disciplined because they know science from communism and so on. And then what happened? Like what was the second argument when it started to fail that you didn't really have time to expand on? And to Marián, I wanted to ask. So Primula was already fired as director of hospital for his links with China. Then he didn't get security clearance from the Czech security services at the beginning of the pandemic. And then the reaction of the Czech authorities was to promote him as health minister, to congratulate him for not having the security clearance. Like, how does that work? Like, didn't anyone protest? Didn't any media say something? Didn't the public protest? Like, what happened?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, there are many questions, and with the nationalism in other countries, well, I agree. I think it's a topic. It's worth to study it in a comparative perspective. So it would be really desirable. And then there are some, I think, particularly unique features of certain nationalism. So it would be expressed probably expressed differently in Germany, in Sweden, and in Czech or Slovakia. So I think it's worth studying. Concerning behavior data, well, I don't have it now. There were some surveys made by various agencies, but not. I do not have data from the early weeks, months of the pandemic, and from what I see from discourse and from my perspective, my experience, it was really spontaneous, and the compliance was really not enforced from above. It was a hugely spontaneous movement where I was once outside of a mask in March. I went into my car and my neighbor saw me, and then later he came to our apartment and brought me a textile mask. So that she supposed that I don't have any at home. So she suited herself and gave it to us. Okay, I will help you. So the people, as it were, surveyed. It was a surveillance, this collective surveillance, which was spontaneous, but it was, advertised as a help. Concerning the behavior, or well, the question was whether it was some kind of fringe journalist. No, it wasn't. It was,
Right.
it is a very prominent journalist from prominent newspaper, and it was very common to see communist past as an asset in spring. It is also, I would add to what Marián told, that Roman Primula, the chief epidemiologist, there was an interview where again was asked why the Eastern countries are so successful. Yeah, because of the previous vaccination, and there is too much democracy in the West. He explicitly used the term hyper-democracy. and I was really afraid when I heard it, of course. And so it was really mainstream at the time, and emerged in April. And the first public, open discussion, the first people who raised their concerns that appeared in April. So in March there was no open discussion. It was really a homogeneous politics supported by media. And the same journalist, to Mario's question, the same journalist Peter Honzek, who wrote that why are we so good? Communist past. 1 year later, wrote that we are so bad because of communism, because people were raised in a way that they pretended to work. They pretended, the government pretended to, that the truth which were spoken out publicly are real truth, but nobody believed communism anymore. And so a similar pattern as it very occurred during pandemic, that the government is pretending that the government is coping, is still leading the war with the virus. Truth is it is not. And also there is some kind of social contract that citizens also pretend to comply with the measures, whereas they do not. And so it was in a time where Czech Republic was very, very bad. The case confirmed death cases were, in comparison to Germany, much worse. The school closures, they were one of the longest school closure in Europe. So the pandemic policy obviously was wrong, entirely wrong, and there needs to be someone to blame, and that someone or something was a communist past later. Eastern legacy.
Yeah, I would add a little to the points made by Milan Hanyš. As with the case of Roman Primula, the same was for Vladimir Krčmery, the way how disparagingly they talked about, so-called personal freedoms and too much democracy, it can lead to irresponsibility. We could see in Krčmery's wistfully looking at China, they were able to put the quarantines, so fast, it's basically commendable even, let's not talk about, concentration camps somewhere else and whatever. It was I wish we could live in China, basically they already, but of course I'm being facetious here. And second one, there's mentioned is who the best, basically, I would definitely have to learn more about, for example, case of Hungary or Poland. But you can see between Slovaks and Czech people, there's there's competition, which is very one-sided, because Slovaks definitely look at what Czechs are doing, but it's not happening the other way around. So basically, Vladimir Krčmery was able to say in March and April, and I need to point in March, Czech Republic was one of the first countries, if not the first, that make wearing mask it's mandatory. You have to. It was already in middle of March. With a state of emergency, and at the same time, Vladimir Krčmery was able to say, in the Czech Republic, the situation is dire. They have huge spread. There are hundreds of dead, which for him at that point in time, it was it's crazy. So many people would die. So that was pretty crazy. Reading what they are saying in the autumn and winter of 2020-2021, when basically thousands were dying, and they were basically saying the same thing. But responding to the questions I was given, the first one was election factor. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, In Slovakia, the elections happened before the COVID, like in I think January 2020. So it was not, of course, yet topic of like a huge discussion. And in Czech Republic, the election happened in the autumn of 2021, which, actually to my surprise, I thought it's gonna be a topic because there were like reviews. Prime Minister at that time, Andrej Babiš, was like, he's responsible for 40,000 dead people. And it was like, yeah, and he also like screwed the economy and he's giving too much money to old people and like whatever. So it was like not even one of the main topics, it was like one of like side topics. And it was like kind of like, yeah, and he also like is responsible for 40,000 people, 40,000 people. It was like basically a side note, like on like Czech and Slovakian like political scene, and I'm gonna put it in like very simplistic terms, which I hate by the very nature. You can see the clash between the, let's say, populists, populists, let's say like nationalists, traditionalists, put a label on it, and I would call, the second one is I call it like a status quo parties. It's like remember the 2000 how great it was. And basically these two parties are always clashing, and we can see the level of globalization. Like for me it's like interesting that Andrej Babiš is a guy who's like blamed like he didn't do enough, and he's compared to Trump and other people, like basically like a COVID denier, even though Milan Hanyš had it in his like presentation, he was quite like vocal, like yeah, we should do restriction, we should do closures, but the response I call it like a Prague top 1%, it was like, yeah, not enough. But there's always a problem with like anti-epidemic response. It's never enough. It's never enough. Like you could like argue you should wear a mask even in the middle of woods. Kids 5 years and older or kids 2 years and older should wear a mask. You can always have this virtue signaling contest when basically like if you are like leaving your apartment, you are basically denying rules like by some sort of a metric. And with like populistic versus status quo parties, I'm gonna touch on like Roman Primula career record. There's a difference between Vladimír Krčmery, who like surprisingly was acceptable by both, let's say, populists and by the status quo parties. He was basically universally praised, like no one, he didn't have any clash of interest. He was basically supported by both sides. By both sides, while Roman Primula was basically supported only by one side. And not even completely. He was the favorite of, let's say, like social democratic leadership. They used to mean something. Like now they are not even like in like parliament, but they used to be the biggest political party on like Czech political scene for like 20, almost 30 years. And so basically Roman Primula, when he was dismissed as a director of faculty hospital, he was like from like a social democratic leadership. They was like, yeah, you could be like advisor for my ministry. Because there's and again I'm basically basing this on hearsay and rumors. Roman Primula dealing with the Chinese investors, that was not like Roman Primula is so corrupt. It was the semi-official policy of some of the like bigger politicians, like President Miloš Zeman and other people. This was like something like, yeah, Chinese, they could bring money into Czechia, so basically we should work for them and make them feel comfortable. So when he was like dismissed, like, oh, you are colluding too much, there were some like other voices, no, you did a good job, so you should work for the ministry. But simultaneously, yeah, you are dealing with the Chinese, we cannot rely, so you are not gonna get the security clearance. Which, funny enough, maybe I had it in my presentation. It was a prerequisite by March 2020. And again, another speculation, like I would dare to ask, like if Roman Primula was very active, like since the very beginning, like let's do this is basically to make himself indispensable. So this like, nauseating talk about the security clearance would disappear, which actually, in my opinion, to a huge degree, was a successful strategy.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few minutes for the last round of questions here, please.
Thank you both for the excellent talks, and I've learned so much about the Czech Republic and Slovakia in the process, which has been great. Milan, I have a question for you about one thing you raised, and you said it to me yesterday when we were walking outside as well. The idea that the citizens of the Czech Republic almost forced the lockdown on the politicians. And I can see what you mean specifically, but it seems to me that like there seem to be like two things going on. There was a high level of compliance is what seems to be clear, especially at the beginning. But there's this second thing. There's these citizen political entrepreneurs, like this millionaire guy. Like we see them all over the world. Like there was that Czech guy who did this hammer and the whatever essay that was that was circulated everywhere, who had no idea about anything, but just wrote this essay and suddenly was getting to debate and humiliate epidemiologists on the television. There seems to be
that would be Thomas Pueyo.
Thomas Pueyo, that's right. God, I just trying to remember his name. And it seems to me like there's this other layer who are demanding some kind of heavy-handed response at the beginning, but they're not really the ordinary people of the Czech Republic or anywhere else. And they end up getting this prominence in this period of uncertainty. So I wonder how much further it went beyond, basic care like giving your neighbour a mask, how much further that kind of activism went, or whether it was really just a narrow layer that was really activist, and most people just stayed home and were scared of the virus.
Okay, let's collect two more here and here.
Sure, I would have a very super quick comment and a tied to my question. If I go back to the point with which I very much agreed about the non-existence of Slovaks in the Czech media discourse representation, I would just quickly point out that more recently, which is outside of your framework, there's a one notable exception, that is the fourth cabinet of Robert Fico in Slovakia, which is all of a sudden all over the newspapers, but it's done in a way as to sort of other the Czechs against Slovaks, much in the way which Ladislav Volí, which you mentioned, described in the 1990s during the split of Czechoslovakia. And I was going to ask Marián if you could comment on the representation of Czechs in the Slovak, but you've done it in your previous response, that there's a greater deal of paying attention to Czechs in the Slovak public discourse than vice versa. But I would still ask a question to Milan, if when you and Toby exchanged the discussion about nationalism and about the mobilization of people through nationalism in March 2020. I would just, as someone whose research anniversaries of 1989, November Velvet Revolution, I would probably argue that there was definitely this similar level of national mobilization present in those anniversaries. It's also present in popular culture. Just one example would be the Kolia film, which ends actually with Smetana's the performance of Smetana's Má vlast. And all of this is actually then very readily and easily mobilized in an event like a pandemic. It sort of brings me back to this question I asked you yesterday, whether it is more of a facilitator or a game changer.
Please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, and Milan, thank you for invoking art, because I'm trying to promote art and international justice as a positive tool, and here we can also see how art can be instrumentalized, not necessarily good or bad, but it's a great example of how it's a neutral tool. The question is for either one of you, and it has to do with identity. What I hear from the presentations is that the self-perception of Czech people is somewhat special. Like, of course, every nation feels special in one way or another. Americans are competitive, possibly Russians are in the victim mentality, so the world is against us, so it's perpetuating the cycle. So what I hear from your presentation is for Czech, it's more like other realm. We're special, we're intellectuals, we have an understanding which is a bit beyond. So has it changed? Because you mentioned, Milan, in your presentation that it was the first time of this new reckoning after 30 years for Czech people to come together and think about who they are. Has it changed? Did you notice some humility after a few years passed? Have you observed some shifts in self-perception? And just a tiny comment, I know we're out of time. My Estonian former friend, she actually sent me very similar messages about what Estonia can do for COVID. Like, they're so high-tech that they invented some kind of, it looked like a Robocop mask, which kind of filters the air, and she was wearing it, and it looked like really this huge device, and she was saying, look, us Estonians were very little, but we're so innovative, and we could wear these devices, so it's a bit similar. So yeah, that's my question, identity.
Okay, Muriel, the final question.
Yeah, I have you have seen, I hope, the film Velké Nic, The Great Nothing, which is a documentary film about the spring 2020, when filmmaker Vít Klusák, who's a famous filmmaker in the Czech Republic, had nothing to do and had great cameras, for very cheap, because nobody was making films at this time. So he was roaming the streets of Prague and questioning these groups of women who were doing masks, who were sewing the masks to help. And what was striking to me is that these women were like saying, we don't trust the government. We know the government is good for nothing, but we want to help, and that's why we do masks. And they were like adding, like, by the way, we don't think masks actually work, but we want to do something. We want to like have this civic spirit of doing something. And by the way, they were talking with the mask down. That was great. So I was wondering if these women had been interviewed in late 2020 or in spring 2021, what would they say? And this is addressed to both of you.
Okay, so please.
Yeah, it's again a lot of wonderful questions. I'm afraid I will not remember everything, but yeah, concerning the spontaneity of the response, and I think there were various classes. The reaction was heterogeneous, and a huge part was, as Marián mentioned, just people who didn't have anything to do at the time because the jobs were closed. And what should I do? Well, if this pandemic, which might threaten us all, was threatening at the time, and what should we do? What can we do in the time when we are forced to stay home, maybe be passive? And so sewing masks was as a way how to be part of the war, and was perceived as the war. This was really framed in that way. And another part were these people who, yeah, they had their interest from the very beginning. And of course, there was very clever people, clever guys who earned fortunes through something, and so they orientate very well, and they really sidelined the experts and created groups of similar-minded people. And the experts like Roman Primula, they joined later. Actually, it was really a director of insurance group who forced politicians to make lockdowns via Excel sheets, and he had to force Primula for lockdowns. And Primula was in the chief epidemiologist. Was not chief epidemiologist at the time, but some public figure already, and he mentioned herd immunity. And there was a huge backlash, a huge fight in the media and from the government and from all these experts and real experts that he should not speak publicly about this, that herd immunity is a forbidden word. And so I think that we see really a dynamic where some experts were sidelined and some experts had to basically accept the narrative whose creators were out of the field. And the thing is that there is no headquarter. Various heterogeneous actors whose interests coincided in that time. Be it irregularly women who have nothing better to do, be it IT experts who saw it as an opportunity. And but the for me interesting thing was the way how I looked on it was how it was framed in the public discourse. It was really framed as a voluntary activity of those IT experts who created apps, maps, websites, who were willing to help just voluntarily. And even there were wonderful stories, many of them are collected in books about pandemic and on newspapers. That's a king of the 3D print. It's some owner of a company of 3D printers, and he also made these shields, and he made them available for free for doctors to hospitals. And it was again, we see an ordinary clever guy who is willing to do something for other people without any real benefit for himself. So I don't know, how much he earned from it, but this is the way how it was advertised, how it was perceived. This is the cultural semantics which coincides with this national expectations, true national heroes who are willing to participate in the process of unification. As for the opportunities to show this national unity, yeah, there are some. definitely. Of course, these celebrations of anniversaries of the Velvet Revolution, and then ice hockey championships. But neither of this was so unifying as COVID, since Velvet Revolution manifestations, there are struggles, and there are various parties who claim, okay, this is not the democracy we wanted, this is something else. Here it was something unique that we should put aside all the differences we have. We can be leftist, rightist, communists, fascists, doesn't matter, we have to stay home. and that's the way that we can show the unity, which was, I think, unique. It's something which anniversary manifestations of Velvet Revolution can't do, because it's perceived very
it's contested.
Yeah, contested. And yeah, concerning Estonia, yeah, I think so. I think it's this kind of self-scrutiny and how the world perceived us is something typical for these small nations which were reinvented in the 19th century before there was any political institutions at all. And so, yeah, it is something we might perceive elsewhere, usually among all these nations which basically reinvented or invented their own identity, and they do not have a continuity of political institutions which would last for centuries. So it somehow preoccupies the public discourse. How are we? What are our unique qualities? Yeah, this is famous Kundera's essays as well. Yeah, what kind of quality we have, which is unique for the world. That the small nations have specific destiny, specific mission, which is not the same as the big nations have. That we have to invent something unique in terms of culture, not in terms of political institutions, liberties, etc., which can be found elsewhere.
Yeah, I would add.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Too much.
No, it's okay. I would add only like a little bit. There was mention of Primula mentioning in the beginning the herd immunity. Actually, I found it like a little bit like funny that in the beginning you can see like the past of like a previous pandemic consensus when he is like asked in like January, February. So what about the spread? He was like, yeah, it's bad, but we cannot do border closures. Like, there are some things we can do, or sometimes we cannot. And he very quickly got like, the very like hardline pandemic response is the way. So he like exchanged like all of a sudden, yeah, of course there will be border closures. But you can see like the little bit like fragments, there was like a previous, not like status quo, like a consensus, like, yeah, there are only like some degree of like quarantines or lockdowns we could do, because otherwise we are in a brave new world category. Like that was like apparent, but maybe I'm like seeing something there. But there are definitely some fragments. And second one I find interesting is like identity question. Like I definitely agree. That's like a classic. How Czech nation describes describe their own like origin and their own qualities. I would like always like ask. It's a famous question. Like when we say public opinion, what is public opinion? And I have this like tendency, like when in Czech we are like asking about public opinion, we are asking like, what Prague is thinking, what Brno is thinking, what people, ideally own their own apartment and have like fancy jobs. Like we could see the video of Milan Hanyš posted like of those like happy people with their respirators. Those were hipsters. Like those were those were not like people, working in like food delivery business or in warehouses. Like these people don't exist. Maria Blatt mentioned the Big Nothing document, and what's fascinating here, one of the stories is one female working in like opera or something in music, playing harp, and there was a huge problem because there were no concerts, so she was forced to work in a supermarket behind the counter. And I was like, when I was watching the document, I was like, wow, they're gonna touch the subject. No, she was the one important. Like all the other ladies working there, no, you always work here. Like, this lady, she actually can do something that is useful. So like we're gonna see and focus on her struggle and how she made it. But like these, like, these people, like, like what are we even talking about? So I have this, again, being facetious here. I always had this like huge issue, which was like, it was pronounced even before COVID. As I consider myself like, let's say, old-fashioned a lefty, like, you know, what about the proletariat? What about the working people? Which, you know, applies for the people like delivering like food or bolt, like all of this like happening, which all of reason, for example, we as academia, of course I'm gonna order food, so some guy for like minimum wage will deliver it. I have like a huge personal issue with it. So I can like see
and they're gonna wipe it with a
then they're gonna clearly, they will like, you know, I cannot even meet you, just like left it in front of my door. I don't wanna like even like deal with you personally, and I'm gonna feel good about like 10% tip. I'm gonna leave because I'm a good guy, you know, I'm a good person. And so there's like so there was even like, it was visible like even in like 2019 actually to begin. I like the expression a radical continuity, you know, basically like you could see the trends, you could see the tendencies before. Like I was even like, you know, it could in some shape or form maybe happen even without a COVID. Like it's not like COVID magically happened. There will be some, you know, epidemic finally, and like moment of time we are in like globally, like what we believe, how we should like take the situation. Like that was basically, you know, bound to happen in a way. And I'm basically always afraid about this divide that is happening more and more between, you know, like scientists, intellectuals, intelligentsia, and, you know, people who do actual work. So when we are dealing with this public opinion, I always wonder, you know, do they still believe in this like narrative, you know, check golden hands when you are doing like a menial jobs? Like I think like there's a definite necessity for like, let's do, you know, time is short, let's do oral interviews with these people, you know, with people who works in the supermarket, who work in the transport. I myself, like, Jesus, like, you know, talking to people, it's just like, it scares me, but I think it's like, it needs to be done because it's already 5 years. Like, you know, it's already 5 years, and as you know, with oral history, the sooner the better, and after some time, this is gonna be just some like mythological account, whether positive or negative. Like this something should be, you know, should be done. Like, you know, public opinion, fancy, but what these people, you know, actually think about the situation.
I would have one more question.
Okay.
Because we still have 10 minutes on the schedule.
Okay.
Do you have a question as well, Toby?
Well, I mean, you go first.
No, you go first.
No, I mean, I did have a question. If I could just ask about, I was interested about vaccination in relation to some of the things that have been talked about in the panel, because, and the idea of communism, you know, the journalist who wrote Communist History as well as saying this. But then it turned out that across Eastern Europe as a whole, vaccination uptake was much lower than it was in Western Europe. And as you said, Nadine, maybe that is symbolic of the fact that in fact the communist history instructs people to be wary of the state, and by 2021 that may. So I'll be interested to hear your views on that.
Yeah, my question kind of relates to that because Nadine reminded us of the existence of Kundera today. I'd forgotten. But Kundera's main thesis was that Czechoslovakia, or he meant really the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, is a kidnapped West. It's like a really, in fact, Western nation that is trapped behind the Iron Curtain, submitted to the Eastern kind of dictatorship. So do we find traces, like, I didn't think of this before, but it seems to me from what both of you said today, like it's still a country struggling with, you know, is it Eastern or is it Western?
Those are wonderful questions.
Go first.
Yeah, I think concerning vaccine uptake, it is important to take into consideration the distinction between the nation's interests and state interests. And the mobilization in spring was really a national upheaval. It was an event of significance for the nation or for the state. The state came later. And when Andrej Babiš, the PM in the summer, tried to weaponize this national narrative, and he claimed that the Czechs are best in COVID, it was ridiculous. Because it is not, you know, it is not because he was a Slovak origin, but because he is a representative of the state. And so whatever the state does and enforces is somehow perceived usually as very suspicious. And it was from the very beginning, Czechs were complaining about the state, about the government. They were absolutely angry about us again, the state is unprepared, we do not have enough face masks. So it was part of this story that as usual, the state failed. and now that failed state is forcing us to take a vaccine. So the uptake was definitely lower in all the Eastern countries, and usually it is explained as a kind of a lower trust in institutions.
Yeah.
In the Eastern countries, so it seems to me plausible. Concerning the West and East discussion, it's really a topic still. It's topic whether Kundera, the essay mentioned the kidnapped West, the tragedy of Central Europe. The end implies that the real Europe is there in the Central Europe, since the Western Europe is no longer that Western Europe it used to be. And I think that's still present. That's very much a story which many of those who now see Western decline favor. This idea that the Western countries, they accepted migrants and therefore they're no longer the West Europe we wanted to be part of. And it's very much present and influential in the political discourse and public discourse.
But it betrays the Kundera's idea in a way, because Kundera was recalling the multi-ethnic nature of Central Europe, including Jewish, Roma, migrants.
Yes, but they were all whites, I think.
There were whites,
they were all
not so much Roma.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been seen that way then.
But in his
whiteness wasn't the same
I would
thing then.
rephrase to a kidnap discourse of Central Europe.
Yeah, it was basically this Bahadur nostalgia, where these elites gathered to speak various languages, they were Jews, and then it's lost. But still, this idea, well, it's active. It was active in the Hungary in the 50s and the 60s in Czechoslovakia, but where it is active in the West, well, no one reads novels anymore. The art does not have such a place as it used to have in the 1968 and the 60s in Czechoslovakia, where there was Czechoslovakian New Wave. We have similar processes in Hungary as well, and so where is the West? And I think it's today it's adopted by many populists that the real West is not on the West anymore. We are the real West. That's the real Europe. That's the heritage we have. This is we denied multiculturalism. We will somehow reduce migration. We accepted migrants only from Ukraine and from Vietnam, because Vietnamese do not pose any problems to us. But people from Syria and other countries do pose a threat, and it's perceived as a real threat to Europe's identity.
Yeah, I would go a little bit on the point made, regarding Andrej Babiš. What I feel is interesting when he said famously, Czechs were best in COVID. Of course, he was ridiculed. Basically, the answer of the Prague was yes, we were, but not because of you. We were. There was a huge celebration on Charles Bridge when there were thousands of people eating lunch together. It was we the people did it. It was not government basically. There was a difference in let's say April there was some support, but even then it was not this this political marketing like Andrej Babiš. We went through experts in task forces and whatever. But by the summer of 2020 there was this we managed, we did good. Look at Italy or Chinese or Spain. But there was this huge not because of state. State basically failed us yet again, which is a classic because state in Czech Republic always fails. But moving to that true West, I find it this is quite interesting idea, because we can see in the case of Czech, I call it this exceptionalism, which is in my opinion it's not new. I mentioned Prague Spring in 1968, there was this idea we will fuse socialism, communism, and democracy. Student is surpassing the master. We're gonna be both better than Soviet Union and Spain. I think this always comes back. It definitely in the 90s was the same. We are the best, definitely.
It was already in 56, actually.
Yeah, and you can say even 1948. This is a basic idea. People take the best ideas in Europe and make some sort of a pastiche, which will be better than the assembling part. And the last one was the communist past. For me, that's always the problematic question. I remember there was some like anniversary of like failure of fall of communism, and I was talking to two journalists, one following the other, and the first one was like, yeah, you study communism, like you could say like all the Czechs, and he actually mentioned Slovaks, are basically a bunch of followers, that like 40 years of communism make them into this kind of like a sheeple nation that always follows the other. And then the second journalist came and he was like, yeah, talk about the communism, like it's the reason why Czech people don't believe in the state and they never follow the rules. Because of the experience of communism. That's the proverbial problem of history, and everybody always accepts that with my like historical knowledge I can prove their arguments. That can be basically like mutually exclusive, and then they can write the article, yeah, because communism it's working and because communism it's not working at the same time. Like it's like Heraclitus, it goes